Hello there, I am Zolairlaw, and this is The Joy of Computer Gaming, where we investigate intriguing, awful, and outright amazing examples of computer gaming history. Today's highlighted game is Dungeon Master, the choose champions, then crawl through corridors with creatures, cranks, and chasms to capture the crazed chaos in a cage game. It's a real-time first-person dungeon crawler by FTL Games that was first released on the Atari ST in 1987, then later released on the Amiga in 1988, Apple IIGS and FM Towns in 1989, PC-98 and X68000 in 1990, Super Nintendo in 1991, MS-DOS in 1992, and a fan remake reusing the original Atari ST assets called CSBWin for almost everything else in 2001 and beyond. This is the first truly great video game I played growing up, and it is still my second favorite computer RPG of all time. I have played the game at least a dozen times since I started using emulators back in 2000-ish, made meticulous charts complete with various weighted aggregations, played with so many variations and different characters, and even tried casting every possible combination of spells in case some were just never found. I hope this is the only video I ever end up putting so much work into. I started working on parts of this video and the research for it back when I first started this series in June of 2017. I've easily put in twice as much time as any other video I've made because this game deserves it. I kept learning new things even within the game that I didn't know before. For example, one of my favorite champions in the game, Wolf, is actually female, which I never knew until I was writing this script. There are so many things I want to talk about or cover, but I really tried to not turn this into Dungeon Master the movie. And I failed. For the sake of expedience, I'm only going to briefly discuss the various features of the game. There is so much information available that I could probably talk about it for hours. Check out the DM Web website linked in the description for way more information if you truly want to know more, or just play the game and experience it for yourself. The back of the box for Dungeon Master says, Dungeon Master puts you inside the most detailed dungeon ever created in software. Every twist and turn, every nook and every corner looks real. It's clear that, even with the limited 16-color palette available, they were trying to make a very realistic-looking game. Compared to most everything else that was available at the time, it certainly was impressive looking, and you can see what they were going for, but it is far from looking real. Still, what they did manage to give us was fairly impressive. You start the game opening a mysterious giant black door with 6 strange runes over it. Apparently there's a large debate over the meaning of those runes, but I've always just seen it as danger. It took about 2 minutes to load without emulation speed up, so you just saw this for quite a while. Once inside the dungeon, it has a large view area that changes levels of brightness depending on the strength of your torch or how much light magic you have going. All of the items, monsters, buttons, keyholes, fountains, and so on were represented on the screen. Not only that, but you were able to click on things and interact with them directly, such as a button on a door to open it or to pick up an object off of the floor. Picked up items were represented by icons, so when you viewed your character's inventory, things that would have wildly different sizes would appear normalized to fit within the same space. This makes your helmet on your suit of armor look very large compared to the rest of your gear, for example. The icon-based inventory was one of the very few aspects this game shares with FTL's older game, Sundog. Enemies not only had unique images and attack animations, many of them could also be viewed from the side and from behind, though some, like screamers, always seem to be facing towards you. It may not seem so impressive today, but this was competing with the likes of Bard's Tale, Wizardry, and Might Magic. There is actually quite a bit of story for the game in the manual, about 25 pages worth, written by Nancy Holder. You play as Theron, an apprentice magician under the Grey Lord, a god of balance. Together they are searching the dungeon in Mount Anais, which is rumored to have the Power Gem, a powerful stone that is rumored to have freed all intelligent life in the world from ice. When the Grey Lord leaves to recover the Power Gem, some calamity happens that rends his personality in two, splitting him into the embodiments of order and chaos. When this happened, Theron became more ghost-like and could no longer interact with the world, for some unknown reason. Chaos, who possessed the legendary Fire Staff, heads down into the dungeon to bend it to his will, while Order works to find adventurers to seek out the Fire Staff. However, they have all failed, and 24 of them have been locked inside magic mirrors in a Hall of Champions. The game begins with Order commanding Theron to find the 4 most worthy adventurers in the Hall of Champions, bring them back to life, and guide them through the dungeon to retrieve the Fire Staff. You control Theron, and in the very beginning cannot interact with anything at all except the magic mirrors. This all changes the moment you resurrect or reincarnate one of the champions. At that point you're in control of the heroes you choose to bring back, and the journey into the dungeon to find the Fire Staff begins. One character is highlighted, and that is assumed to be the character whose hand is picking things up and manipulating the environment. The entire game can be played with the mouse. You can click the arrows to move, you can pause the game by clicking the bottom left or right corner, you interact with the main view by clicking, you open and close the character inventory screens with a right click, and so on. Items are represented by icons in a character's inventory or by a graphical representation in the main view. You can also move using the arrow keys with insert and home to turn, which makes more sense when you see the Atari ST's keyboard. Pressing F1 through F4 opens and closes the corresponding character's inventory screen, and pressing escape pauses the game. Attacking is done by clicking on a light blue box representing the weapon in the character's right hand, then choosing the type of action to do with it. Casting spells is done by selecting a number of symbols, which are represented by a power level, followed by the unique symbols that make up the spell. You can view extra details about a character by clicking on their eye in their inventory screen, which shows their skill levels and their 6 stats, each of which have 2 values, which are the current value on the left and the base value on the right. So many mechanics in the game are hidden from the user, and there is a ridiculous amount of depth I could go into, so I'm only going to touch on a small amount of it. The game is more or less linear, in that you'll progress through each level of the game one after another, though once you complete level 12 you'll go back to level 7 to retrieve the fire staff, then head down to level 14 to complete it, before going up to level 13 to complete the game. The game's puzzles and level design are where the game truly shines. Time is of the essence in this game, as the entire thing plays in real time. There are many puzzles in the game that require pressing a button and running fast enough, or timing something you throw, or dodging incoming spells. The game is designed around the way you move around and interact with the main view. Elements that move over time, such as fireballs or closing doors, can be avoided or hit on accident just by doing things too slowly or too quickly. There are many puzzles that do not involve much timing as well, and just need a little ingenuity to figure out, such as putting an item into this portal to drop it onto a trip plate that opens a door, or walking on the right plates on the ground to close and open doors to allow you to continue. There are false walls you can walk through and various hidden buttons that will open new areas, trigger enemies to spawn, or other effects. There are a few special items you can only find by pressing the right hidden buttons to reveal them. In many places in the dungeon there are hidden trip plates that can cause various effects as well. These may or may not have a delay in them, making some of the trip plate or button effects rather surprising, such as this wall opening and revealing some animated armor several seconds after you stepped on the hidden trip plate that set that effect into motion. There are also a few traps in the game, mostly pits and fireball launchers. One area, where you get a weapon called the Diamond Edge, shoots a ton of poison fields that you have to walk through, taking a lot of damage as time goes on for every step. The combat is completely built around timing. Enemies will move to attack you, but you can step out of the way before they make an attack, or come up to their side, attack, then back away. This often makes battles a bit of a dance, as you will often look for places to sidestep to avoid taking damage, then line up to hit back. Since there is a bit of movement involved, the game rewards big, slow, powerful attacks more than weaker, fast attacks. Using a Berserk, the endgame power attack available on the best weapons in the game, will pretty much always be better than a simple stab or swing, even with the same weapon. A strong fireball easily wins over a weaker one. You can also throw items using the mouse cursor and clicking the upper portion of the main view. The best way to deal with an opponent is to try to avoid letting them attack you at all. There are even places in the game to try to let the enemies take advantage of this style of attacking by teleporting them around to your back or your sides. If you're not careful, many times you'll find yourself surrounded by monsters. Your 4 characters occupy a single tile in the game world. At the upper right corner are icons representing the location each of your characters is in, so you know who is in the left or the right, front or the back. These icons represent your character when looking straight down at them. Interestingly enough, my wife always thought these looked like bearded men with a hat and holding their swords over their head. A side effect of the game pushing the Atari ST so hard is that when you're viewing your inventory, time actually passes faster. This is because the game doesn't have to worry about rendering the main view. On more powerful computers, the main view runs at the same speed as the inventory screens. This leads us to the characters. You can have up to 4 characters in your group, but there is no restriction or requirement to have 4. You can play with just a single character if you like a bit more of a challenge. Every character has 6 visible stats: strength, dexterity, wisdom, vitality, anti-fire, and anti-magic, as well as health, stamina, and mana. Strength governs your carrying capacity and how much damage you deal in combat. Dexterity is your ability to hit enemies as well as avoiding or reducing incoming physical damage. Wisdom helps you cast spells better and controls how quickly mana is recovered. Vitality controls how much health and stamina you regain over time and helps to reduce the damage you take. It's also supposed to give you resistance to poison, but a flaw in the game's compiler caused that to never work. Anti-magic and anti-fire were supposed to give you resistance to magic and fire respectively, but again the game's compiler caused these to never work properly. Health, stamina, and mana are pretty simple to understand. Well, if you don't understand the word mana, it's the same as spell points. There is also a hidden stat called luck that goes up and down and affects successes or failures in things the character does. It goes down whenever you have a success and up when you have a failure, so your character will never constantly fail or constantly succeed at everything, well, unless they're guaranteed to always fail or always succeed. Each character can also increase in 4 skills: Fighter, Ninja, Priest, and Wizard. Apparently each of these also have 4 hidden sub-skills, but aside from vague references to them, it's hard to tell exactly what these really do in the game, so I'll only refer to the main 4. Your Fighter level governs what attacks you have available with melee weapons and seems to govern how well you hit and how often you do additional damage. Ninja levels affect unarmed combat, thrown or fired weapons in a similar way. Priest and Wizard levels work the same, just for different spells. They affect your level of success at casting spells of greater difficulty along with your wisdom. There are 24 champions available, all with their own positives and negatives. Some are based more on specific skills, such as Stam being a fighter, Layla being a ninja, Mophis being a priest, and Gothmog being a wizard, but every character can work on every skill, so there is no need to keep them like this. Aside from their stats and starting gear, there is a portrait and a name for each character. What they look like in the portrait doesn't change anything in the game, and this is all you ever see of your characters. When you choose to keep a champion, you can either resurrect them, which keeps their name, stats, and skills exactly as you see them, or you can reincarnate them, which allows you to put in a new name, wipes all of their skills, and slightly increases their stats. It doesn't take long to work up to the skill level the characters start with, so it's always best to reincarnate because your characters will be better in the long run for it. There are some characters that start with 0 mana, making it difficult to get them started on Priest or Wizard levels. You can use Warcry on them to level up their Priest level, or you can get another character with a mana-raising item, such as Chani with her Moonstone that increases your mana pool by 3, which is enough to cast 2 low-level Priest spells. To raise your character's skills, you simply use those skills. Swing weapons or get attacked by an enemy to get better at fighting. Punch or kick, throw or shoot things to raise your ninja level. Cast priest or wizard spells to increase those skills, though you can use the Warcry ability on your bare hands to very slowly work on priest levels, or use the Vorpal Blade melee weapon to work on wizard levels later on. When a character levels up, you get a message about it at the bottom of the screen. They will gain some maximum health and stamina, and if it was a wizard or priest level, some mana as well. They also will gain a small random amount in stats based on the skill that was increased, with all of them having a chance to increase vitality and anti-fire. Fighter and ninja skills can increase strength and dexterity, whereas priest and wizard skills may increase wisdom and anti-magic. You can see what stats you gained by clicking on their eye, since the current value will be red and have to increase to the new base value. You don't just see a number for your skill levels, they all have unique names. Nothing shows up if you have no skill in that type, and in ascending order there is Neophyte, Novice, Apprentice, Journeyman, Craftsman, Artisan, Adept, Expert, 6 levels of Master, and finally Arcmaster. I have never done enough grinding to get an Arcmaster in anything, but since your characters are incredibly powerful even at Expert or low-level Master level in your skills, it isn't a necessity at all. One unusual aspect of the game is that every level of the dungeon has a multiplier for how much experience you get, so that lower levels give you more experience than higher ones. You also get more experience shortly after an enemy has attacked your party, to the point that it almost seems to be worthless to practice without being attacked, because you gain up to 4 times the experience in battle. This does at least make an odd sort of sense for fighter and ninja levels, but I don't see how making potions while being attacked would help you get better at making potions. It just seems like a needless distraction. Since there are some easy enemies that do very little damage, such as the Screamers, you can sit there and punch them or stab them with a weapon for some easy levels. This is particularly true at the end of level 4, where there are respawning Screamers that have a bit of health and a water fountain just down some nearby stairs so you won't starve or die of thirst. For an example, I just punch over and over with Zed here and go from Neophyte to Journeyman, or 3 levels, in about 30 seconds. The skill level requirements do double each time, so this has diminishing returns, but it is useful to know if you like to do a little bit of grinding. Characters also have to worry about how much they're carrying. If you are getting heavily loaded, around 75% of your carrying capacity, the load will turn yellow and your group will move more slowly as a result, unless you have boots of speed which offset this. If you are at or above your capacity, it turns red, and you get even slower and slower the more overloaded you are. I loaded Woof up with tons of heavy chests and tried to move. This is as fast as I can go. This is really slow. Oddly enough, she isn't losing stamina from this. You also have food and water levels, which are pretty easy to keep up. Once they start getting low, you start losing stamina, and after you run out of stamina, you start taking damage. Just drink and eat as you need to, and things will be just fine. The equations for regenerating health, stamina, and mana are based on ticks in the game. Every tick you either will or will not gain some health, stamina, and mana based on your vitality for health and stamina, and your wisdom for mana. When resting, you can clearly see how Chani gains mana far better than everybody else, for example, because she has a high wisdom. However, Wolf has a low vitality and sometimes loses stamina while resting, even when she's well fed. That's one weak constitution you have there. If a character dies, all of their possessions are dropped to the ground along with a skeleton to represent their corpse. You can take the skeleton back to one of a number of resurrection alcoves, place their bones on it, and your character will be alive again. If everybody dies, it is game over. The magic system is completely unique to Dungeon Master. There are 4 stages of 6 runes each, all of which have their own names, and every spell takes at least 2 runes to cast. The first stage is a power level from 1 to 6, which controls the strength of the spell. The second is an element, which is the usual earth, water, air, and fire, then void and last negative material of all things. The third set has very little in common with each other, with poison, creatures, energy, flight, support, and lightning. The last rune here, named Gore, is never used for anything, regardless of there being a lightning bolt spell, which uses the energy rune here, and the manual saying Gore is used for dangerous potions. The last set are the 4 skill types, Fighter, Ninja, Wizard, and Priest, then Light, and lastly Darkness. Blood Witch and Mystic Wells sort of copied the idea, giving each spell some obscure symbols, but you don't use the symbols directly. The Legend of Grimrock also uses spell runes similar to this, but there's no power level and you can choose them in any order. In Dungeon Master, having to choose the spell symbols like this makes casting and combat a bit frenetic at times, and often leads to making mistakes. I know this will annoy some people, but it actually felt arcane and foreign to do spells this way, and I think it fits well with the feel of the game. Since the symbols all have names, you can actually talk about the runes without using the symbols, though it certainly does sound like its own language. You don't include the first symbol unless the spell's strength is important. For example, the spell Fireball is Full Lightning Bolt is Okathra, and Fire Shield is Full Nita. A very weak Fireball is Low Full and a very strong one is Mon Full The scrolls in the game that tell you about the spells use the textual versions of the symbols, as opposed to showing you the symbols, so this chart in the manual becomes useful until you have them memorized. There is only one spell that you do not learn in the game, which is making a poison potion. No, you don't drink those, you throw them and it makes a poison cloud, but you lose the flask in doing so. You can create your spells before you cast them. Choosing the symbols is what uses your mana, as opposed to the act of casting them, which means you can prepare a spell then gain your mana back before actually casting it. The UI lets you backtrack a rune, but you don't get the mana back. And after the 4th rune, the first set of runes appears again. Choosing one wipes out whatever spell you have prepared. The first rune, being the power level, sets a multiplier for the cost of the spell, with a Mon spell costing roughly 3.5 times what a low spell costs. Each subsequent symbol has a set cost, modified by the multiplier that they cost to use. That Low Full I brought up costs only 13 mana, but a Mon Full will cost 47. Each spell has a difficulty level, and putting more power into it also makes it more difficult. You can only sort of get a feel for this by trying them. If it is too powerful, your spell will fizzle, though you'll still get a little skill even when you fizzle, but you get far more skill if you succeed. If you try to cast a spell that doesn't exist in the game, it'll say your character mumbles a meaningless spell. Almost every spell that does exist is useful, depending on how you play. There are potions which require you to have an empty flask in hand to cast. The most common is healing, which just takes a Vi rune. But I also like to use strength potions on my frontliners so they do more damage, and wisdom potions on everybody so their mana constantly regenerates faster. There's also a mana potion, but since it costs about 4 times the mana you get out of it, it really isn't worth doing. The Cure Poison potion only ever needs to be cast at the minimum level. All poisons get cured by it. There are various attack spells, such as Throwing Poison, a poison cloud that does damage over time, Fireball, which is the most powerful attack spell, Lightning Bolt, which I never use because it's harder and more expensive to cast than Fireball and doesn't do as much damage, and Weaken Non-Material, which is one of the only ways to hurt non-material enemies in the game, such as ghosts, water elementals, and materializers. Be careful with these because you can hit yourself with the spells if you cast them into a wall. There are 3 types of shields you can put on your characters, which is denoted by a dashed colored line around the character at the top. Though it doesn't show it, these do stack so you can have multiple fire shields at once, for example. Shields, which decrease the damage you take, may come in a potion and only protect a single character, or the shield spell which applies it to everybody. Fire Shield protects everybody, making you take less damage from fireballs. And Spell Shield, which you can never cast but you can find on a couple of wands, protects you from other spells. There are numerous other effects in the game, but there is no way to know they are still going as there's no notification system. Some icons would have been nice, though that convention was developed far later. Maybe just some text saying your invisibility spell has worn off would have been nice. There are also a number of utility spells. Right away you learn Magic Torch, which adds short-term light and is really easy to cast, though later you can learn Light, which, while far more costly, lasts significantly longer. Azizi, Light! For some strange reason, there's a Darkness spell as well, but unlike Light, it doesn't last very long. And it's also kind of weird seeing everything slowly get lighter as it wears off. There's an invisibility spell that I've never noticed did much, and I'd rather just kill my enemies anyway. There's a spell that opens a door in the distance that you only need to use once in the game. There's magic footprints, which leave these steps behind you, I guess to help untwist to your teleporty areas. And a see-through walls spell that also sees through doors, but is never really that useful. There are numerous items in the game, including weapons, shields, armor, containers, food, drink, potions and flasks, torches, keys, and so on. The dungeon is well laid out with the items you get, basically drip-feeding you, slowly improving gear as the game goes on. Eventually, most of the best things are hidden away behind secret buttons, such as the best weapon in the game, the hard cleave. Others, like the Helm of Light, are in a room where you have a serious fight to get through. Scrolls may be read by holding them and clicking on the eye icon, or putting them into your right hand. Chests may be accessed by putting them into your right hand, clicking them on the eye only looks at the contents. Using keys or other items in the main view is done by picking them up, then clicking on the appropriate keyhole, slot, throwing them, or placing them on the ground. Food, drink, and potions are consumed by clicking them onto your character's mouth. A notable problem with items, aside from potions, which show their strength if you put them up to the eye, is that there is no way to tell how good they are. You can use them to get a feel for what is better, but you never see the actual stats for much of anything. This is compounded by the fact that there are numerous hidden skills in the game that affect your spells or your attacks that are modified by necklaces you can find, making them seem useless because you can't see the change. This Eckhard Cross, for example, raises your character a level in Influence, skill 14, which is a hidden pre-skill. I don't even know what that affects in the game, but I only know that much because of the extracted game data available online. Whereas this Pendant Ferrule raises your wizard level, which you can immediately see. The most powerful of these is the completed Fire Staff, which gives you plus 2 levels in every skill. There are items that increase your attributes as well, such as getting plus 8 dexterity from Gothmog's Cloak of the Night, or the various staves that raise your maximum mana. In general, though, the later you are in the game, the better the gear you're finding. If it sounds more impressive, it probably is. For example, you'll find leather, then chain, then a couple pieces of mithril chain, then plate armor, then the armor of light, and finally the very heavy armor of dark for torso pieces. The only one that isn't in order as far as strength goes is the mithril chain, which is stronger than the plate armor, but only marginally. The various melee weapons, staves, and wands have different attack options available. It doesn't take long to realize that swing or jab are lower power options on weapons, whereas melee and thrust are fairly nice. When you finally get the weapons with the berserk attack option, you will appreciate just how much damage these can do. Assuming you have the fighter skill level to use them, of course. However, a number of other attacks seem rather lackluster, or don't really do much at all. Stun on the maces and Morningstar comes to mind, as does parry on the various swords. There are extra little things they do behind the scenes, but you don't really notice them, so the net result is that there is no point to them. And I hate using ranged weapons in these kinds of games, so I tend to not use bows or crossbows. Even if I did, you have no way of knowing how effective they are, since they don't even tell you how much damage you're doing. Is using a sling with rocks more effective than just throwing the rocks? I have no idea! There is a special ammo area below your character's right hand that accepts up to 4 ammo items. If you throw or shoot whatever weapon you have, your character will automatically pull out the next ammo item. The first slot here also accepts a regular weapon, so you can start a battle throwing a dagger and your character will pull out their falchion. There are also some worthless items, such as the ash or the gems outside of the couple of puzzles that need them. There is a staff and a dragon spit that only let you swing them, but they do give you a little extra mana, so I guess they're marginally more useful than an expended torch? Maybe? Staves, wands, and a few other items come with unique abilities that use charges or just consume the item. Finding Fury, a flaming sword that throws fireballs, is pretty awesome, until you use up all of its charges, but at least it's still a useful weapon afterwards. The Storm Ring throws lightning bolts, but only lets you punch once it is out of charges. The magical boxes are fascinating one-use items that have a freeze life power that freezes enemies for a time, significantly longer with the green variety. Though there is also an Eye of Time ring that allows using the freeze life ability multiple times until it's drained. Like I tend to do in almost any sort of role-playing game, I hoard up all of these limited-use items and then never end up using them. They eventually decorated the floor at the bottom of the dungeon after I unloaded them all and didn't even bother to use them to help fight the dragon lurking there. Oh well. There is a wide variety of enemies in the game, and I only know their names because of the data extracted from the game. Most of them you will never learn the actual names of. The monsters range from very typical ones like skeletons, giant rats, ghosts, and a dragon, to very unique ones like the gigglers, which only steal from you then run away, oitus, however the heck you say that, which somehow have 4 legs that join up to only 2 feet, black flames which rise out of dark circles on the ground, and materializers which become more or less solid depending on their whims. Anybody that's played the very beginning of the game will be familiar with the mummies and screamers on the second level, both of which are very easy to fight. Like your party, each dungeon tile is sectioned off into 4 spaces. Some enemies, such as the mummies, screamers, and trollins, occupy only 1 space and can have up to 4 of them in a single group. Larger ones, such as the magenta worms and giant rats, take up 2 spaces, so you only ever see up to 2 in a group. The largest enemies, like the quaddles, oitus, and giant scorpions, occupy an entire dungeon tile. Most of the enemies simply head towards you and attack. These make up a bulk of what you will face. Other enemies will try to throw projectiles or shoot spells at you, and often like to dodge to and fro when they do so, making them annoying to hit. The gigglers are special in that they will run up and try to steal items in your character's hands, giggle, and then run away. They do not actually have a real attack and are pretty easy to take care of once you can catch up with the darn things. Some enemies are immaterial, meaning that you cannot hurt them with regular weapons, they can go through doorways, and projectiles fly right through them. A special weapon, the Vorpal Blade, allows you to strike them in melee, and the weakened non-material spell Des Eu can hurt them directly. A fireball that hits a wall just behind a ghost can also kill the ghost, but this is hard to pull off properly. Certain creatures are completely immune to the effects of spells, such as the animated armor on level 12. In general, if you cast a poison cloud on an enemy and that enemy doesn't try to move out of it, they are probably not affected by spells at all, or they're immaterial. There are alternate ways of killing or hurting enemies. You can close doors on them, which will hurt them each time it tries to close. If you teleport on top of them or fall down a pit on top of them, they will die instantly. Also, if you make them fall down a pit to a level that doesn't support them, such as dropping animated armor down to level 13, they also die instantly. None of these alternate ways of hurting your opponents gives you any skill gain, unfortunately. Since the game is designed to have you move around in combat, monsters will often try to come at you from the side. You can sometimes see them being indecisive about it before trying to come at you. This makes battles more tense, and you really need to pay attention to what the creatures are doing. There is also a fear mechanic, which affects some monsters. It's seen most often in groups of opponents. When you kill one of a group, the rest of the group may become fearful and try to run away from you. You can also try to cause fear by brandishing a staff, such as the Staff of Claws, doing a war cry, or using the aptly named Horn of Fear. The fear effect often does run off, and they will stop running if you get them trapped and they are unable to keep running. There is no music at all in Dungeon Master, which is unfortunate. However, the sounds are all digital sound effects that fit in with the feel of the game rather well. Running into walls, throwing objects, opening doors, clicking buttons, being attacked by enemies, they all make various unique sounds. This was rather exciting when the game came out, since so few games used digital sounds at the time. Particularly notable are the swish when you attack and the sounds the spell makes. Also, the further away the source of a sound is, the quieter it is. I don't know why, but the sound the giant scorpions make is just terrifying. It freaks me out, even when I'm fighting one and completely expect it. We first got Dungeon Master when I was 9 or 10 years old. My mother was the first to play the game. I don't remember exactly the team that she had, but I remember she had Azizi and Wolf in it. I was fascinated with the game right away and watched her play all the way through it, so I suppose it was a bit spoiled for me on my first playthrough. A short time later, an Atari magazine came out with a review for the game, and it included this exact spell chart for the game, but I don't remember the magazine's name. This chart saw a lot of use as we all ended up getting turns playing through the game, each with our own save disk. A few years ago, I made extensive charts of all of the characters in the game, keeping track of the highest and lowest stats, making weighted averages, and so on. And even so, you know what I base my decisions on for the champions? The nostalgia and their silly little portrait images. If I went off of my charts, I'd play with Hawk, Boris, Wolf, and Stam, or maybe Elijah, depending on which one I wanted to go off of. However, I instead always pick Azizi, Wolf, and Channy, with Alex or Zed or Stam for my fourth character. Why'd I even bother with the charts? Because I'm a big geek who likes making charts. No other explanations, really. Azizi is a badass warrior woman, and I always think of Zula, played spectacularly by Grace Jones from Conan the Destroyer, even though Azizi has a lot more hair. Johnny is a great caster, but I largely just picked her because she's really cute. And Woof because of a fascination I've had with her since I first watched my mother play through the game. My parents called her Woof the Wolf because who knows what a Bika is, and yes, she's not even a wolf. I probably have this single low-res portrait in an old Atari game to blame for my fascination with wolves, and why I use a brown-gray wolf for my avatar. When doing the playthrough for this video, I was using an online map that was generated by extracting the data directly from the game, and found a couple locations I would never have found on my own. This first is a secret area on level 6. All of the buttons in the game have a distinct look of some sort, but this is the only time clicking on one of those rings does anything, about halfway through the game. It opens up a wall here with an area that contains a Vorpal Blade, which is very handy to have this early in the game since level 8 has loads of ghosts that are easy to kill with it. The other is a false wall on level 11, right near the end. All of the other false walls have no decorations on them, but this one does. I didn't bump into walls with decorations because I didn't realize this ever occurred in the game. Well, it does once. Behind it is just another pair of boots of speed, but finding out was a bit annoying. By the way, in the MS-DOS version, that decoration isn't even there. There are 2 ways to end the game, though one technically just gets you killed. If you obey orders, then you will bring the fire staff back to him at the entrance of the dungeon. He opens the doors and rewards you with a ton of fireballs to the face, which, unsurprisingly, kills you. The correct way to end the game is to take the fire staff down to the very bottom of the dungeon, free the power gem, join the 2 together to give it its full power, and then fuse chaos. This is done by putting up flux cages that he cannot go through, and when he is trapped, fuse him back with order to make the Grey Lord balanced and whole again. Unlike almost all other RPGs, you don't even kill the main bad guy. In fact, he's invincible. You win by curing him, essentially making him whole again. There are a lot of nice little touches in the game. You can use a coin to flip it and randomly get a heads or a tails. Eating food shows your character chewing, whereas drinking does not. The compass actually points north instead of telling you which direction you're facing like a real-world compass would do. Many other games, like Eye of the Beholder, just point the direction you're facing, which isn't how a compass works, though I guess it is a bit easier to read. I never knew this one and found it while recording. If you have no priest levels, you cannot identify the power level of potions. Once you are at least a neophyte priest, you can tell what level they are, though. This game isn't perfect, as no software ever truly is. There are so many dead ends in the game with nothing in them or just a piece of food. They could have added more hidden traps, even just a dagger shooting at you here or there, which is already supported in the engine, to make the game feel more dangerous. The dead ends could have had some bloody spots, or a skeleton with a scroll talking about how the character is feeling lost and hopeless, or something to flesh things out a little more. Just please, if you're a budding game developer, do not make rolling boulder traps like Anvil of Dawn. Please. Good lord, I hate those. Taking or dropping a number of items with the screen flipping for inventory is a bit sluggish. Later games like Blood Witch and Eye of the Beholder let you access your inventory without covering up the view screen, or others like Anvil of Dawn that allow a right-click on a held item to immediately stick it into your inventory. Though nobody should ever make an inventory like Skullkeep with a giant linear list of items. Okay, you know what? Dungeon Master's inventory wasn't all that bad. Nothing stacks. I guess this gives a limit on your carrying capacity, but it feels a bit silly that each individual arrow needs a separate spot that an entire chest could occupy. Thrown and shot items are annoying to use because you have to constantly pick them back up and put them back into your inventory. There's no way to know how good anything is in the game, you just have to get a feel for it. How is any of the food edible? For how many years has this bread or this apple been just lying around in this dungeon waiting for someone to pick it up and eat it? Ugh. A couple of the levels feel like filler, particularly level 7 where you get the fire staff. There is very little here aside from several very, very long corridors. I suppose it's supposed to feel epic going through it all, but trying to rush through it for the 10th or even 20th time, you really feel how pointless its layout is. Lastly, though this is probably more a personal thing, I wish the game had some sort of music, though unfortunately the game was already pushing the 8 MHz processor to its limits as it was. Just a little music would have gone a long ways, though. It adds a lot to the atmosphere of Dungeon Master 2 Skullkeep. Still, Dungeon Master is what near perfection looks like in a video game. It is easily the best game I played in the 80s, and still one of the greatest RPGs of all time to play through. I cannot recommend it enough to fans of action role-playing games. For the most part, when playing the game, you will not notice many, if any, bugs at all. Most of these require doing some very strange things in the game to cause them. However, a few, like the fire shield bug and enlarge my view, are ones that most players probably noticed when playing the game back when it was new. There were a few bugs with Chaos in version 1.0. Shortly after the game came out, Wayne Holder of FTL mentioned the bugs and that they were releasing a free update to fix them, so I had to check them out to see what happens. If you catch Chaos in flux cages like normal, but put a flux cage on top of them before using Fuse, the game completely locks up. For me, it grabbed some items I had on the ground on level 14 and put them around his feet as well. Very strange. Still in version 1.0, if you try to close a door on Chaos, it can sometimes cause the game to go wonky. Here we see Chaos teleporting away after throwing a fireball, but the fireball just hangs around in midair. I try moving, which works, but the fireball catches up to me, killing a ZZ and leaving a permanent blast effect in midair. I wandered around, and Chaos is still doing things normally, but I can walk into that blast effect. After messing around a little bit more, a system error 60 message appeared and the game completely locked up. Also in 1.0, when trying to capture Chaos, he may completely vanish. This is because he was allowed to hide inside a Black Flames enemy. In my video, he's inside this one here. After dispelling it, I had to turn away, then back again for him to appear. At least with this one, it just seemed like he had a strange extra power that worked with the Black Flames to allow him to hide. You'd just have to dispel some of them to find him if he went missing. In both 1.0 and 1.1, there's a flaw with Fire Shield. It seems that the spell Fire Shield often does unexpected things to fireballs. Here's me going through some fireballs on level 9 of the dungeon without a Fire Shield. I take a bit of damage and that's about it. Now here's the exact same party with a powerful Fire Shield on. The party member that gets hit by the fireball just falls down dead, whereas everybody else is barely touched. This was with version 1.1, so I tested again in 1.0 and 1.2. The instant death bug happens in 1.0 as well, but it works correctly on 1.2, so at least they ended up fixing it. There's an eye with a message next to it that says enlarge my view on level 11. Since you find a magnifier on the previous level, you should just need to put it up to the eye to trigger it, right? Well, any item actually works. Yep, I'm enlarging your view with this chest of food. Ah, a box. I see. Not technically a bug, well, depending on your perspective, but the game normally blocks you off from leaving level 13 after you've melded the Fire Staff. It does this by hidden trip plate as you walk out of the gem chamber on level 14 while carrying the completed Fire Staff. Well, you could just toss the completed Fire Staff through the doorway, walk out, pick it up, and continue the game without blocked access to the rest of the game. Not only that, but if you take the completed Fire Staff all the way back to the beginning, Order doesn't open the door and kill you like he normally does with the incomplete version, which is odd considering it's far more powerful after completing it, but of course, normally you wouldn't be able to leave level 13 to be able to do so. You can throw items through gates, which is a pretty cool concept. However, in version 1.0 of the game, you can throw keys through gates, oftentimes leaving you in a situation where you cannot complete the game. In version 1.1, they changed it so that keys are always stopped by gates. Try as you might, you can't screw yourself over this way. Because of the way the see-through walls spell works on doors, if you open or close a door with the spell on, the window you see through the door moves with the door. Now that's just silly. On rare occasion, you'll see a few stray pixels on the left wall. This seems to be caused by levers or buttons ahead and to the left of you. Some monsters, such as the stone golem, flip back and forth as they head towards you. See the club swapping shoulders? The previous bugs were all ones I found during my playthroughs, as well as the chaos bugs from the changelogs for version 1.1. Paul R. Stevens, the creator of CSBWin, translated the source of every version of Dungeon Master and Chaos Strikes Back on the Atari ST, so he could create an accurate version of the game to run on any modern system. In doing so, he also analyzed the versions for flaws as well as differences between the versions, and found numerous other bugs. I'm only going to list a few of the interesting ones you could actually reproduce in the real game here. If you use the fuse action of the Fire Staff at the edge of a map, such as the north wall of the Resurrection area on level 14, the game will subsequently lock up. Never save the game with items held in the cursor or the leader's hand. If you do, when you reload that save, its weight will be counted twice on that character's total. Even if you get rid of everything in their inventory, they will still have phantom weight left over. If you go to sleep on a space that may have a pit, and something triggers the pit to open while you're on that space, the ceiling and floor don't get drawn until after you fall. In version 1.0 and 1.1, if you pause the game just as you hit a monster and did some damage, then unpause, the action icons are not drawn back. You cannot do physical attacks at this point. You can just go to sleep and immediately wake up to restore them, however. If you click on the eye to look at the stats of a character and press escape while holding the mouse button down, you'll pause. If you press escape again without unpausing, things get a bit glitchy for a little while, especially if you try to view your character's inventory by right-clicking. If after pausing while holding the mouse button down on the eye and then you click to unpause, a different glitch appears. When you use the see-through walls spell to look at a wall, it uses extra colors in the display palette. Because certain enemies, such as the Trollens, also use extra colors, these clash and the enemies through the window on the wall will appear with the wrong colors. Since the darkness levels require a mid-screen palette switch on the Atari ST, it is possible to overload the interrupt handlers and cause invalid colors to show up. This is easiest to see with no light, running into a wall and moving the mouse around like crazy. One particular bug in the CSBWin list caught my attention. It says that if your last living character dies while viewing another champion's portrait, such as from standing in a poison cloud, the game does not end. Immediately I knew I had another way of playing one of my favorite games and even tested it out to see if it works. Yes, it does. You could even save the game and reload it, and it stays in this weird state. To say I was a little excited when I found out would be quite an understatement. So after getting the ghost state started, you realize there are several differences in the game this way. You cannot directly access your ghost's inventory. Instead, right-click on the main view to access it. Since they are the active character, this works and allows you to carry various items. Your ghost cannot attack or cast spells. You could try to cast spells, but you just burn mana and nothing happens. You cannot directly access your hands. You can do so through a right-click, though. Torches in your hand do not expire over time. You never regenerate health, stamina, or mana. You do not get hungry or thirsty. If you're overloaded, you do not slow down. I spent a lot of the game in the red for weight and had no problems. You can still click things in the main view like normal. You could even throw things and, oddly enough, gain ninja levels. You still lose stamina, though, but it'll hit 0 before long doing so. Enemies will chase you like regular, but they will not make melee attacks. They will still use special abilities like the Giggler stealing or the dragon spitting fireballs. You do not take damage from anything, not even falling into pits, which doesn't even make a noise, or running into walls, which still does make a noise. And projectiles and spells fly right through you like you weren't even there. I can confirm that you could play through the entire game this way, except for the very end. But level 4 poses a couple of challenges, in that there are 2 doors that require breaking down to get through. For the first, I rezzed my dead character, who happened to be Boris and was really weak, so it took him quite a long time to get through. Then I trudged all the way back to the beginning, had him kill himself again, and the portrait I clicked on died immediately. What the heck? I tried again, and instead of killing Boris, I just tried clicking on the portrait this time. Sure enough, the character in the portrait fell over dead immediately, without being able to choose to resurrect or reincarnate them. The portrait is still there, so you can even end up getting 2 of the same character this way. Weird. Okay, so to continue, I killed off someone else, sorry Leaf, and then started again. Since the game creates the character when you click on the portrait, you do lose anything you were holding. Whoops. Back I went and totally forgot about the second door at the end of level 4 that you have to chop as well. Instead of manually removing the door by getting Boris through the whole level again, I did resort to a level editor, removed the door, and then continued with the game. I also made a save disk with this edit for anybody else that may be interested in playing the game this way on the Atari ST. You have to be creative to kill or get by enemies. You can throw things, but you're limited on how many items there are to throw. You can use doors or teleport onto enemies or drop them down pits, all of which I used to get through the game. My worst enemies ended up being the Gigglers, because they were the only ones that could affect me by stealing my torch. No, it's dark! Give it back! I should have grabbed more spares along the way. However, you cannot do anything about the immaterial enemies like ghosts, water elementals, and the materializers. Take care not to get caught like I did on level 8, surrounded by ghosts. I got by them by leading them out of the way and just running past. I had to resurrect my dead character to cast Zocathra at the end, then actually use the Fire Staff to defeat Chaos. He had very low stats, especially since I picked Boris for the task. Just surviving was a challenge, and it was a lot of fun weaving around trying to catch Chaos, even if I did die a couple of times trying. I finally succeeded, and in the very end, Boris was the only one who got any credit, even though Tiggy did almost everything. Well, that was certainly a unique way to play the game, if nothing else. At CES in June 1986, over a year before the game was released, FTL Games released a teaser trailer for Dungeon Master on the Atari ST. It started showing the familiar black door opening with some busy-looking walls and a lot of scrolling text about the Fire Staff. Then an alpha version of their game engine showed walking forward a few spaces with a couple of doors opening up to a stairway and announcing the game was coming soon. It looks like the game was expected to be a slower-paced, possibly turn-based game instead of what it finally ended up being. On the back of the original Atari ST box were a couple of screenshots that are not representative of the final game. You never see that location, the potion Shawnee has isn't in the game, scrolls don't look open in the left hand like Mophis has, the 4 characters at the upper right corner are just boxes, there are 2 character options open with Charge, Battlecry, and Bargain not even being in the final game, and all of the text at the bottom left doesn't even exist. The second screenshot shows some more items that aren't in the game and some sorts of action gauges where the food and water levels would be in the final game. The game had incredibly good copy protection for its time. The discs had a deliberately bad first sector, and the game would periodically try to use it. If it failed, all was good, and the game went on. If it didn't fail, the game would kill off all of your characters. Sometimes, when it seemed suspicious, and this could even happen on the real discs, it would switch screens out of nowhere telling you to put the Dungeon Master disc in. This could happen if you had the wrong disc in as well. This was only mildly annoying, and you could just press OK to continue playing. Most of the characters in the game are based on other things such as real people or characters from stories. Zed Duke of Banville, for example, is the name of your character in Sundog, and Banville is the colony you need to find in that game. Chani is a heroine from the book Dune. Azizi Johari is based on a Playboy model with the same name from the 1970s. Gothmog is named after a character from Lord of the Rings. There's a full list available on the DM website that I have linked in the description. The physical copy of Dungeon Master I have is version 1.0, and oddly enough it says copyright 1986 on it. In version 1.0 there were lockpicks in a couple of places, such as on Alexander. These were supposedly going to be used to open chests, but thankfully they changed it so you could just open chests without needing lockpicks at all. Lockpicks were brought back in Chaos Strikes Back and can be used in place of keys in a number of places. Otherwise, most of the changes in version 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2 are bug fixes. I already mentioned a number of bugs in the versions they affected in my extras section. This is the Amiga version, originally released in 1988. I played a later version of it, version 3.2, so I'm not totally certain what all has changed from the first Amiga release to this one. Right off, we end up seeing a new screen that lets you choose, I'd assume, what language you want the game to be in. English, French, or German. Once we get into the game, it's largely the same as the ST version, except it has a few extra quality of life additions as well. When you tap on a wall, it makes a thud sound if it's not illusionary. Warcry makes a yeah sound. When enemies move, there is a sound as well, unique to each enemy. You can drink directly from fountains. And the cursor changes color as well. It's yellow when it's an arrow and peach when it's a hand. When attacking, there's a big X at the upper right instead of the word pass. The sound is also in stereo, and since the sound also drops off the further away something is, this is often considered the first case of 3D audio in a video game. Lastly, more walls are drawn than the original version, and for some odd reason they're upside down from the original, which looks a bit weird when you're used to the original. Here we are starting the Hall of Champions on the Atari ST version, walking to the left. Notice how the walls appear past Zed's portrait here. I checked in on version 2.0 on the Amiga, the first version released on it. It looks just like the original game with the textures the right way up and no extra draw distance. Here's the exact same place in version 3.2 of the Amiga version, and right off you can see the wall 2 forward and 2 left of where we start. When we get to Z, you can clearly see more walls in comparison, as well as how the wall texture is upside down. You can even see Nobby's portrait back there on the right. In any case, this is a great version of the game, and if you don't mind the Amiga emulators, it's a nice way to play Dungeon Master with some added bells and whistles. It also allows you to play Chaos Strikes Back as well. There is supposedly a kid dungeon on certain instances of the Amiga versions. I spent far too long trying to get this to work. I also don't know the Amiga well enough to even copy a file to try copying it off of the Amiga discs. There was also a playable demo of the game released for the Amiga. It looks like it's carved out of the real first level, offering 5 champions to pick from, some instructions on walls talking about the game and how to get through it, a single skeleton that dies really easily, and a dead end that just fireballs you at the end. Not a bad way to get people interested in the game, I suppose, though it was really brief, only 4 minutes, and that's including the roughly 1.5 minutes of loading time. Here is the Apple IIGS version, originally released in 1989. I started the game at 1 MHz as that was the emulator's default, but that was far, far too slow. I changed it to 8 MHz to match the speed of the Atari ST, and then the game played well enough. However, even at that faster speed, there was a noticeable amount of screen tearing going on. It seemed like a weird blur of lines was drawn than the rest of the screen. The mouse cursor also blinked so much that it was rather hard to cast spells. I could not figure out how to make the number pad match the Apple IIGS, so I could only move forward, back, left, or right using the arrow keys on the keyboard. I had to click to turn it all. And apparently the 2GS only had a single button mouse because right-clicking didn't work as expected. In fact, in the KEGS emulator, right-clicking changed the speed of the processor, so sometimes I ended up causing the game to slow way down. Whoops! Well, you could at least press 1 through 4 to open and close that character's inventory, and clicking on their health bar with the left click worked like right-click in the ST version. As far as gameplay goes, it was a lot like the other versions. It also had the yeah sound from Warcry, and monsters made a sound when moving, but you didn't get a sound from clicking walls and couldn't drink straight from the fountains. The sounds were slightly higher pitched than normal. The sound was stereo though, as you could hear the door opening to your right instead of mono like the ST version. Because of the annoying movement and the screen-tearing display problems, I'd recommend playing a different version of this, even if otherwise it seemed about the same. There is a kid dungeon in the Apple II version that I could not get to work. However, the DM website offered the dungeon.dat file for it online, and I created a Dungeon Master disk on the Atari ST that allowed playing it. This is a very easy and short dungeon. It has a few paths where you fight gigglers for treasure, or spawn enemies behind gates, or throw things at some mummies that are on the other side of a pit. You can collect coins to get pieces of armor of dark or light, but the ultimate goal is to get the Emerald Key so you can slay the dragon. The path is lined with torches since it's the only place without maximum light. I tried to gain levels a bit, but never could. I don't know if you can level in this version, so I just restarted with resurrected characters. Not that it really matters because everything here is so easy. A rock pile died in one hit for a whopping 5 damage. The final enemy, the dragon, took 3 swings to die. And after you beat the dragon, you just get a scroll which simply reads, "The people are happy! The evil dragon has been killed!" We're now viewing the FM Towns version, released in 1989. Like most games on that system, it came on a CD-ROM and was available in Japanese only. Because it was released in Japan, the messages on the walls, the names of the items, your health, stamina, mana, and scrolls, and a few other items were translated. However, your stats and the additional descriptions of items were still in English. The Japanese parts look rather out of place because they're quite large. This also changed how damage amounts show when you hit things. This version rendered incredibly quickly, which made moving around a snap. You could go forward, backwards, and turn left and right with the arrow keys, which felt great to play with. Getting around was definitely faster than the other versions, except perhaps the MS-DOS version. Compared to other versions of the game, the sounds were really high-pitched. You can tell they're the same sounds, they just sound a bit strange because they're played too fast. Because it was on a CD-ROM, it also included CD music, which played on the main menu as well as while you were traveling through the dungeon. Each level seemed to have a different song, and a few seconds after changing levels, the song would shift over to the correct song for whichever level you were on. For example, when I fell down a pit to level 3, the song shifted. After going back up a level to level 2, it suddenly shifted again a few seconds later. The same happened again when I went back to level 1 to resurrect Wolf. The music isn't exceptional or anything, but it is an intriguing addition. When you picked up items, black turned into a brown color for some odd reason. For example, these leather boots are almost completely that brown color while carried, but the moment you put them down, they turn black as expected. Also, there's a giant X when you click to use a weapon instead of a pass, just like the Amiga version. The game did come with a cute story guide as well. In any case, this seems like a pretty neat version of the game, particularly if you can read Japanese or you've played the game enough to know what everything is already. This is the PC-98 version, released in 1990. It plays rather slowly, though I don't know the system well enough to know the correct timing to choose for the time period. I did try an 8x speed later, and that played a bit better, but most of the recording is at the emulator's default of 2x. Like the Apple IIGS version, there's always visible interlacing going on when the screen refreshes, even with a faster processor. Aside from the slowness, for the most part, it plays a lot like the FM Towns version of the game, since a lot of the text has been replaced with Japanese. However, though it is using the correct speed for the sound samples, they have glitchy sounds in them. I don't know if this is because of the emulator or if it really was this way on the PC-98. Movement was at least easily done with the number pad. I did notice the light levels were a bit odd, probably because the PC-98 couldn't do the mid-screen palette shifts easily like the Atari ST could. Sure, this version is playable like the Apple IIGS version, but I recommend playing a different version. Up next is the Sharp X68000 version, released in 1990. I think I finally found a decent emulator for this system, Win X68K, because this isn't all distorted like the other one. Right from the beginning, we can see the game has a lot more screen space, so they've changed the intro screen a bit, adding a tree and more scenery around it. Once you get into the dungeon, there is a permanent dragon with a sword border around the whole game. The game itself is almost just like the Atari ST version. I say almost because right away I notice the walls don't alternate when you move, but the floor and ceiling do, giving the game a bit of a static feeling. Otherwise, just like the FM Townsend PC98 version, this has Japanese in various places instead of the original English. Movement was a bit weird. The arrow keys moved in the direction of the arrow, so no turning, but using the number pad, 1 turned left, 2 moved forward, and 3 turned right. I couldn't find a move back button there, so I was playing with one hand on the number pad and another on the arrow keys, which was a bit strange to do. The only other difference I noticed is that some of the sounds were a lot deeper in the version, particularly running into walls. This doesn't look like a bad port to play if you could read Japanese, though in that case I'd still recommend the FM Towns version instead. Here is the Super Nintendo version, which some sources say was released in 1991, but it clearly says 1992 in my copy of it. Maybe it was released in 1991 in Japan or something. It has an introduction with a simple song, some text, and an anime-esque guy flickering, which I guess is supposed to be the Grey Lord, which changes scenes, I assume, to Chaos and the Red Dragon at the end. You start from a very blank-looking screen, which does take you to a modified version of the typical start screen with the black door, but with a unique song as the door opens. This does supposedly have a unique ending video, but I didn't play through the whole game to test that. This is the most unique version of Dungeon Master I've played, particularly because all of the graphics have been touched up in this version. The hero portraits all look very different as well, with very plain-looking faces that almost look the same, except some notable what-the-heck kinds of exceptions. Movement can be done by holding down the X button and the D-pad to move, or the L and R buttons to turn. Otherwise, the controller moves the cursor, with B selecting things and A to exit out of things. It didn't take too long to get used to, though it feels a bit sluggish to use compared to a mouse. The character screen takes a moment to generate and is rearranged a bit. For the most part, though, the game felt the same to play until shortly into the second level I came to an area with the first screamer and noticed the dungeon was different. Things are simplified a bit here, though I'm not certain why, as the game wasn't overly large or anything that should have prevented it from being the same. The sounds seem inspired by the original, but they are all different. When you are walking around, either some music is playing or there's a constant water drippy sound that's really repetitious. The music is different from what is used in the FM Towns version. The sound is stereo, at least. Interacting with the view felt very sluggish, with about a 1 to 2 second delay between trying to do a thing and it happening, which is never a good thing. At one point I pressed a button and thought it didn't work, so I pressed it again. Then the door starts opening, and a moment later it closes again. This makes the game more sluggish than it needs to be. By the time I got to the first screamer, I was about 17 minutes into the recording versus about 10 minutes for the other versions I've been playing. I would only recommend playing this version if you're very patient or prefer the mildly updated graphics. This is the MS-DOS version, sadly released far too late to be treated particularly well by the PC community in 1992. In 1987, these were top-of-the-line graphics with 16 colors at 320 by 200. However, with the release of the incredibly easy-to-use 320 by 200 256-color VGA graphics mode, many games at this point had already greatly revamped their graphics. Even clones of Dungeon Master, such as Eye of the Beholder, had far better-looking graphics by the time Dungeon Master finally came out for the PC. Is the DOS version a bad port? No, not at all. It was just released several years too late. In fact, it's a lot like the Amiga version 3.2 version, complete with the extended view distance and upside-down wall textures, though this version says 3.4 when I go to save. Because I heard there is a unique animation at the end of the game, I decided to do a solo run of the game, with Woof of course. It took about 6 hours. That unique ending shows, I'd assume, the Grey Lord throwing a completed fire staff into what looks like a large burning kiln or a forge, I suppose, to melt it. Then afterwards, Viborg, the city Theron was from, gets rebuilt and some very long-armed characters greet each other, you get some text about your success, and then you're dumped to DOS. Meh. In any case, this version has the same intro music as the FM Towns version, though it sounds a bit different here. But this is the only place this version has music. Many versions of the FM Towns music would have been a nice addition, I think. The sound itself is mono for some reason, probably because it didn't specifically target Sound Blaster Pros or above. The rock piles, flying snakes, and water elementals now all make attack sounds, though other silent monsters like the rust monsters are still silent. A number of monsters also have unique sounds when they move, such as a rattling sound when monsters move or a metal clanging when the animated armor moves. I didn't play through the entirety of the Amiga version, so it possibly also has the extra sounds as well. When enemies cast spells, there's an extra sound when they cast them, which is the same sound as a Zoe or Dispel spell hitting something. Because the walls are all upside down, some of the decorative elements were moved. One of the smaller buttons is shifted down a bit, and it looks like it's off by a pixel, and the slime drains are also far lower. Since this game is run from the hard drive, it loads and saves almost instantaneously. For saving, it doesn't stay on the game saved screen, so you save and almost immediately see the waiting to save screen and have to click cancel. It would have been nice to have multiple save slots, but I guess I could just make a batch file like I did for Eye of the Beholder. I did notice it was hard to increase my stats very high with Ku and Dane potions. This is apparently a change made back in version 1.2. I played the original game in version 1.0 and 1.1 mostly, so I never noticed this. This change also makes the bonuses drain faster, so yeah, it's a lot harder to keep really high stats. What you get is still really powerful though. There are many remakes of Dungeon Master and Chaos Strikes Back, but I wanted to take a look at a couple of the more notable ones. The first is Return to Chaos, a fan-made port to Windows by George Gilbert created from 2000 to 2008. I played version 0.49, which seems to be the final version. The game plays full screen, which on modern systems means it's going to be really distorted by default. The video I captured was at 640 by 480, so you won't be seeing the distortion at least. You can change the resolution in a config file if you like, but since this video is 480p, 640 by 480 was the best choice anyways. In the beginning, you get to choose whether to play the Return to Chaos version of Dungeon Master or the original. I tried their version, which wasn't too different. It uses the distance drawing of the original game, such as the Atari ST version, but the upside-down walls that the later Amiga and MS-DOS versions used, which is an odd choice. The portraits in the Hall of Champions have a transparency effect, and you can see them from the side. You can tap on walls, monsters make sounds, and Warcry says yeah, like the later versions of the game. Right off, there's something different once you start the game, which is a spellbook. You'll also notice that the mana glyphs are all grayed out. You can't use them until you find a scroll mentioning those specific runes in the game. There are scrolls in the beginning to tell you about this new mechanic. I really don't like this because it prevents you from experimenting with the magic, or of course knowing the spells ahead of time, but for a new player it probably wouldn't make much of a difference. It does make me wonder if you ever learn the Gore rune because no spells ever use it. The game was very responsive while playing. In fact, it felt a bit too responsive, as things happened so immediately, such as when something dies, whatever objects it dropped hit the floor before you even realized they were dead. Not particularly a negative, it just feels odd after playing the game, probably way too much for my own good. The monsters also move differently, seemingly independent of each other and not in a group like the original game. This would make some areas of the game a bit more frenetic. Going down in the dark, it is notably darker than the original game at its darkest. I tried throwing a key through the gate, but it didn't work. I could throw an arrow through it, but that looked kinda glitchy. Just about all of the graphics are from the original game, though the pink hand and yellow arrow cursors from the Amiga and DOS versions are used as well. However, the splash border when you hit a monster is at higher resolution, as is the gray smoke when monsters die. I didn't play all the way through this version, but it certainly seems like a decent port to play, especially if it lets you transfer characters to Chaos Strikes Back. This is CSBWin by Paul R. Stevens, which is a native Windows port done by translating the assembly code of Chaos Strikes Back on the Atari ST to C++, allowing it to be ported to a number of other systems. This is actually also available in Linux, Mac OS X, Pocket PC, and numerous others. It's a bit rough, and I prefer the feel of the game in an emulator, but it is definitely playable without emulation. It gives you a few extra options that are not normally available, such as 4 save slots, utilities similar to what the original Chaos Strikes Back offered, and an editor for making your own dungeons. You can set up multiple dungeons like I did, so you can play it with Chaos Strikes Back, Dungeon Master, or any other dungeons made to use the same game engine in a separate directory for each. Here is the Kid Dungeon from the Apple IIGS version, for example. Oh, and don't try to get hints outside of CSB or you'll just crash the game. This adds the wall tapping sound in later versions of Dungeon Master, but isn't present in Chaos Strikes Back on the Atari ST. It also fixes a number of bugs in the game. Otherwise, there are a lot of problems with this port. There are weird issues with the mouse positioning and clicking. Like, trying to pick things up does not feel good, and it seems that there's a bit of a skew on the position of the mouse cursor and where you actually click. The display lags, but the sound does not, so sounds sometimes seem to occur before whatever action you're taking in a number of places. The display lag is really clear when casting spells, and it takes a while for the text for fizzling to appear. I was playing this at the same resolution as my Atari ST emulator, but it felt like it was struggling to keep up with the graphics. These combined did not feel great to play. The sound system is also a bit wonky. On the original Atari ST versions, if one sound played while another was going, the first sound was cancelled. This doesn't have that restriction, which normally would be a good thing except that a gate opening makes a set sound. So if you move while it's opening, the sound restarts at a new distance, but the original is not cancelled. Right from the beginning, I started hearing multiple gate opening or closing sounds because I'm impatient. Just for testing purposes, I also tested with the latest version 17.6, released on October 5th, 2018, but it still has most of the same problems, particularly with the sound, unfortunately. This is certainly a fine way to play the game, and subsequently Chaos Strikes Back or even other unique fan-made dungeons as well. It's just a bit buggy. It's still actively being updated though, which is pretty awesome considering Dungeon Master's now a 31-year-old game. Dungeon Master had an expansion set called Chaos Strikes Back, which came out in 1989, as well as a sequel named Dungeon Master 2: The Legend of Skullkeep, which was originally released in Japan in 1993 and later in the US in 1995. There were also 2 spin-off games, Theron's Quest on the TurboGrafx-16 in 1993, and Dungeon Master Nexus on the Sega Saturn in 1998. Chaos Strikes Back allows you to port your characters from Dungeon Master into it, though you can enter a prison with a creative host of pre-made characters you can use as well. The game comes with a character portrait editor and a hint system because this game is really confusing. It never saw an MS-DOS release, so it is not as well known, which is truly a shame. Trying to map the game is incredibly difficult, because you are rarely staying put in the same area or even the same level. There are pits on top of pits that drop you several levels and hurt a lot. And there are so many portals, many of which you might even notice, which can take you up or down any number of levels. There are various gigglers configured in one part of the map that were only discovered by reverse engineering the game, with loads of portals, pits, and trip plates, and since they move somewhat randomly, they will be manipulating parts of the game without you even knowing it. Random ones will portal to levels they will just die on to leave any items they had on them in unexpected places, meaning every game is going to be a bit unique. Compared to the original game, it is far more a puzzle game since it is laden with complex rooms, and your characters start out high level so they barely level during the course of the game. The game is being manipulated as far as possible to do many creative things, such as the supplies for the quick room where each space has a different timer for a pit to appear underneath it, making running across the room getting the items challenging. There are 4 paths for the 4 skill types, each of which have blinking invisible portals in them to take you to different similar looking hallways so you never experience quite the same thing each time, even if you pick the same path. One area has loads of false walls and red dragons hidden around inside. There are false pits you need to walk on, whole areas designated to flinging spells and projectiles back at you, and the diabolical demon director, which is rather small, but every few spaces requires a lot of effort and tricks to proceed on. Coming from Dungeon Master, this game is so much fun for a puzzle lover like me. I've played through it many times, and it is always a different experience from one playthrough to the next. I'll probably end up doing a whole episode on it as well. I highly recommend it to anybody who's enjoyed playing Dungeon Master. Dungeon Master 2: The Legend of Skullkeep was originally released on the PC-98 in 1993, which is a very similar system to MS-DOS PCs. For one reason or another, however, it took until 1995 before it reached MS-DOS, and by then it felt a bit on the dated side, at least on the visual side. Also released in 1995 were Skullkeep, with its digital characters integrated into the game, and Anvil of Dawn with loads of color and pre-rendered imagery. Both of those games also offered smooth rotation and movement, as well as loads of speech. Skullkeep, on the other hand, only did a poor quality zoom effect, which just scaled up the graphics badly to give a half step when walking forward. This even scaled up the clouds in the background, which just made it look really bad. The simple zoom effect was fine underground and in dungeons at least. The only voices in the game were from NPCs, with dialect that consisted only of at the merchants in the game. The aesthetic of the game was quite a shift from Dungeon Master's attempt at being realistic, with this game being cartoony instead. I liked the cartoony look myself, but it didn't feel like Dungeon Master because it didn't match the original look and feel. However, even with these problems, it was still a better game than Skullkeep or Anvil of Dawn, simply because of the Dungeon Master core. You have almost all the same spells, though magic footprints, see-through walls, and Zocathra are all missing. A slew of new spells have been added as well, such as a spell shield, finally, Arrow, Strength, Dexterity, Wisdom, and Vitality, a carrier minion that I have trouble ever getting working, an attack minion, a guard minion, and a field that reflects projectiles. I didn't really care for the minion spells, but the others were welcome additions to the game. Almost all of the old spells and abilities also use the same sounds from the original game. Combat was enhanced a bit, such as being able to attack with each hand separately, as well as easily attack a direction other than forward. The whole sidestepping combat system remains, of course, and the game expects you to do so. The enemies themselves have a host of new abilities, such as being able to dodge fireballs, hits sending you flying back a space, being able to fly through your party, and so on. The combat is really a step up from Dungeon Master, and it's one of the best parts of the game. I also rather like the music in the game, especially 2 pieces in particular. One, which I've always just called Rainy Days because most of the time the game is raining. The place just after you start the game and first get outside to the shopping area in the beginning. The other piece I like only shows up in a single zone of the game that you generally will spend only 5 minutes or so that I call Dance of the Cows. Here there are creatures called thorn demons, but they're big and bulky, they don't attack unless you attack first, they eat grass, and if you kill them, they drop steaks. They're cows. Very large spiky cows, but they're cows. There are also plenty of unique puzzles as well, such as having to play fetch using a bone with wolves to get items across pits because they can jump them, but you can't. This was pretty silly, really. However, the sprawling outdoors area feels like just a bunch of connected rooms with little changes here and there to tell them apart. You just go through these rooms to try to get the 4 pieces of a special key to finally get into the tower, which I assume is supposed to be Skullkeep, but it just looks like a tower. There are many other quality of life updates as well, but I may do an entire episode on this game later, and we'll go into more details there. In any case, it's a good game, and I recommend you give it a try if you like Dungeon Master. Theron's Quest was released on the TurboGrafx-16 in 1993, and I guess this will turn into a mini-review since I don't talk much about console games. At first glance, it would appear to be designed as a limited version of Dungeon Master for the system, but it fortunately has a lot more to it than that. The game extensively uses CD audio to great effect, complete with a high-quality voiceover for the intro, though the anime-esque art style doesn't match the game very well. When in the dungeon, the game's graphics and sounds are straight from Dungeon Master, except there are 3 squares next to each character for fire shield, spell shield, and regular shield buffs to appear, instead of surrounding the character's rectangle like the original game. The CD is playing either music or water-drippy sounds the entire time. The drippy sounds are rather reminiscent of the Super Nintendo version, though with better quality and variety. You always play as Theron as your first character, who isn't even a spirit like in Dungeon Master, and acts similar to Torham from Dungeon Master 2. There are 7 different dungeons, with only the first dungeon open at the beginning since it acts like a tutorial for the game. After the first dungeon, 5 more open up, and once you complete all of them, the last dungeon is available. Possibly due to restrictions on the TG16, you can only save between dungeons, and Theron's skill and stat increases are saved. No items, no increases for the other characters, or anything else is kept between dungeons. When you enter a dungeon, you have to resurrect heroes each time. After every dungeon, Theron must be killing everybody that came with him because they're always the same heroes and you have to resurrect them to have them join your party. This does let you choose different heroes each dungeon from the 7 available. Most of them are very similar to characters from the original Dungeon Master. In the view screen, the controller feels similar to a slow mouse, but it jumps around a lot elsewhere. It actually is a lot like the Super Nintendo version in that regard. You have to get used to items being held at the bottom right corner of the target space to put them in, which is unlike the Super Nintendo version. In one part of the first dungeon, I got stuck for a while because I simply could not move fast enough using the movement buttons at the bottom right. It turns out if you hold down button 2, left and right turn you, up moves forward and down moves back. This makes moving a lot easier and allows you to move fast enough to get through this puzzle. All of these dungeons remind me of the Kid Dungeon from the Apple IIGS version. Here, the dungeons are all very small and the enemies are all very easy. They all seem to be made smaller than a single level of the original Dungeon Master, even though they sometimes have plenty of levels. I was surprised that shortly into Dungeon 2, there was an area with fireball launchers, twisters, and spiders where you had to hit the spiders, but it was a sufficiently difficult puzzle to work out, and it wasn't just a copy from one of the other games. This reminded me a lot of Chaos Strikes Back in a good way. This made me want to play more of the game to find out if there was more of this sort of gameplay, so I ended up playing through the entire game, which only took about 5 hours. There are a few other new areas, such as shoving portals and the Den of Shadowdan, some flying full bombs to dodge, and skeleton scales where you had to get skeletons to walk on trip plates to proceed. But most of it was cobbled together regions from Dungeon Master and Chaos Strikes Back. For named areas, you'll see The Matrix, What is Underfoot is Soon Overhead, Supplies for the Quick, and the Diabolical Demon Director, though with Dungeon Master-style demons, amongst others. You'll also see various random parts from both games, such as many from the second level of Dungeon Master, the Teleporter Puzzle from level 5, the Pit Puzzle also from level 5, 2 portals and a door from level 6, and so on. Fairly early on, I hit a bug caused by either drinking from a wineskin or refilling it, not totally certain which. It causes the third character to have a shield on and their weight to be permanently stuck at 99.9, making them constantly lose massive amounts of stamina with every step and making movement very slow. I couldn't figure out how to fix it, but since the dungeons are so short, you don't need to worry about drinking or eating anyways. It was fun enough to finish since it was pretty short. If you like Dungeon Master and Chaos Strikes Back, might as well give it a shot to pass 5 or 6 hours since there are a few new puzzles in it. This is Dungeon Master Nexus, released for the Sega Saturn in 1998 by Victor Interactive Software. It doesn't seem to have anybody from the original team involved. So far as I know, it was only released in Japan. It is a 3D reimagining of the original Dungeon Master with all new graphics and somewhat similar gameplay to the original game. Most, if not all, of the champions are based on the characters from the original game. Some of the new portraits for the original characters look ridiculous, especially Daru and Woof. Chani, on the other hand, looks simply adorable. Movement was rather slow, so just getting around took quite a while. The UI felt alright to play with, but it generally necessitated shifting your view downward to pick things up off the ground. The view shifting down like this off and on made me feel quite sick rather quickly, and unfortunately I could not play very much of the game. Sorry, I can't really say much more about it. This is The Legend of Grimrock by Almost Human Games and released in 2012. The Legend of Grimrock isn't actually made by anybody involved with the original Dungeon Master, but I'm including it here because it is the closest spiritual successor to the Dungeon Master games. In fact, it started out as a Dungeon Master clone, but eventually evolved into its own game. I really do like the look of it. If you want to try a modern reinvention of the genre, complete with Dungeon Master-esque puzzles, this game will definitely cover that for you. It does start off with a few things copied directly from Dungeon Master, such as pushing buttons to teleport things behind a gate, just like the Chamber of the Guardian, a button to remove a portal long enough to get past if you're fast, just like elements of Time is of the Essence, multiple named paths to take with different themes, alcoves you place items in with text on the walls, and so on. There are even hooks and chains on the walls in numerous places as well, and evil heads which at least largely do something in this game. However, playing it, I was not enthralled. Your characters are one of 3 classes and only can gain skills when you level up and put points into those skills. You can see what you get from leveling up right at the beginning, and it's just occasional stat increases for the most part. The special attacks you learn are done automatically. Your health and energy barely budge as you play through the game. You barely feel like you're getting more powerful. The spells are almost all the same as each other, and you have to level up to even use them in. I really hate the leveling up in this game because it's so boring and it doesn't feel rewarding at all. In fact, I had so many issues playing this game, my wife was worried I was going to turn this video into a mini rant about how much I didn't enjoy Legend of Grimrock. Well, no, I'm just stopping here. This may do it for other people, but I just got bored playing it. I was far more excited to play a Ghost in Dungeon Master than playing this game. Oh, and there's a sequel as well, which, just like Dungeon Master 2 and Eye of the Beholder 3, takes you outdoors, which always looks wonky with this sort of game. Anyways, other people may enjoy this far more than I did. Everywhere I've looked, things mention how great Dungeon Master's sales were, without saying what they actually were. The only concrete number I could find is that it sold 40,000 copies in its first year, which was fairly respectable back when 50,000 to 100,000 sales was enough to warrant making a sequel for most games. Some other sources have said that by 1988, at least half of all Atari ST users owned the game. It was the best-selling game for the entire Atari ST line of computers, but I have no clue how many actual copies of the game were sold. If anybody is interested in a detailed account of the making of the game, I've included a link to the Digital Antiquarian's article on the subject. There is technically an example of an older real-time 3D view RPG like Dungeon Master called Dungeons of Daggerath that came out 5 years before it in 1982 on the TRS-80, but this game is particularly difficult to get into. I only played it for a short while because I really did not care for it. You have to memorize keyboard shortcuts, it has weird sound and lots of graphical glitches. It was very difficult to get it to work in any emulator I could find and could only get it to run in an old MS-DOS emulator, so you're seeing an emulator running in an emulator. And I have no idea how accurate this was for the game either. As for the style of the view used in the game, it was already being done in turn-based games, with the earliest example to my knowledge being Uklabeth, the predecessor to the Ultima games. Aside from the dungeons in the Ultima games, other games adopted this basic view with games such as the first 7 Wizardry games, well, 8 if you count Wizardry Gold, the first 5 Might and Magic games, well, 6 if you count Worlds of Xeen, and 7 if you also count Swords of Xeen, Alternate Reality of the City and the Dungeon, The Bard's Tale, Pool of Radiance and later Gold Box games, Moraf's Revenge with its confusing view showing all 4 directions at once, and my personal first game, Maze of Death. However, the functionality, real-time interactions, and cursor-driven interface combined with this view were unique to Dungeon Master when it came out. It single-handedly spawned a new genre, which eventually came to be known as dungeon crawlers or blobbers, because your party travels as a single entity or blob. Just after it came out, so many other similar games came out mimicking it, including Bloodwitch, which had a 2-player split screen, Galdragon's Domain, which had a visual paper doll, Mystic Well... Eye of the Beholder and its sequels, Dungeon Hack, Lands of Lore and its sequels, Stonekeep, and Anvil of Dawn. Recently, newer games in the genre have also appeared, such as the 2 Legend of Grimrock games. The truly awesome, or perhaps unfortunate thing about all of this is that absolutely nothing that has come out in the genre that Dungeon Master created has been as enjoyable an experience, not even its own sequels. Dungeon Master truly is the master of dungeon crawlers. Which isn't to say I didn't enjoy the heck out of the other games. Well, Mystic Well can go die in a fire, preferably a very, very poorly drawn one. Just none of them can take the crown from Dungeon Master as my favorite in the genre. A few years after Dungeon Master, the basis of the genre expanded into full 3D with Ultima Underworld, another great game I'll be highlighting later. From there, 3D action role-playing games expanded into the Elder Scrolls Arena and Daggerfall, SSI's Ravenloft and Menzoberranzan, and Shadowcaster. Well, kind of. This eventually led to games that started looking familiar to fans of the genre today, with great games such as Gothic 2 and Morrowind. The fan base for the game is still going strong. I found a forum site at www.dungeon-master.com that has a number of still active people on it talking about various aspects of the game series or making fan remakes of the original game. I wouldn't be surprised if there are several hundred of them by now. I posted about the ghost mode I discovered, and so far it doesn't seem anybody else has ever heard of playing the game this way. Of notable interest, though, is that somebody made an entire website that you navigate by traveling through a small map using the Dungeon Master graphics that runs in JavaScript. It even allows you to move around with WASD. Pretty cool for nostalgia's sake, but man, this would be an annoying if memorable way of navigating an actual website. And for the curious, int33h means interrupt 33 hex, which was used for mouse drivers back in the MS-DOS days. The company behind Dungeon Master, Faster Than Light Games, or FTL for short, was the gaming arm of a parent company called Software Heaven, which I can find almost nothing about. They started off with a great-selling game called Sundog Frozen Legacy, created by Bruce Webster, which was originally on the Apple II in 1984, then greatly updated for the Atari ST and released in 1985. There, it was the best-selling game for the ST's first year. I personally have never been able to get very far in this game myself, but it is a unique space trading game with a very memorable UI. In fact, the aptly named FTL, which came out in 2012, reminds me a lot of Sundog. Minor release, an arcade game called Oids, created by Dan Hewitt, was released in 1987. This is like a cross between Choplifter, Lunar Lander, and Zeppelin, but with a lot more levels. It has a cult following, and I keep seeing people mention it as their favorite ST game. I definitely do not share that sentiment. I've already mentioned the sequels and spin-offs to Dungeon Master. Unfortunately, not long after Dungeon Master 2 came out for MS-DOS, FTL ceased operations in 1996. An article I found from 2006 talking about the game with the lead designer and developer, Doug Bell, mentions that porting Dungeon Master to numerous other systems is what consumed most of their time after its release, and is unfortunately the reason they ended up failing. They were just a 5-man team and could not produce much new content while also spending so much time porting the original game to so many new systems. I really wish the people that created the brilliant puzzles of Dungeon Master and especially Chaos Strikes Back would have made more games like that. But just about everybody involved in the company seems to have faded into obscurity, probably because they stopped being involved with creating games like Doug Bell and Andy Jaros. The fact that so many other people have the same names does not help when trying to search for them either. Nancy Holder wrote the prologue story to Dungeon Master. She is far better known for writing several tie-in books for the TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, and Highlander, though she's certainly done many other tie-ins as well. There's a huge list of her work on her website, though I'm not personally familiar with any of them. She's married to Wayne Holder, the producer for Dungeon Master, but I can't find anything about him even on her website. Well, maybe she isn't married anymore, since her bio on her About page doesn't mention Wayne at all, and specifically says she lives in San Diego with her daughter, Belle, 2 corgis, and 3 cats. Do be careful if you visit her website, though, as it seems to be at least partly hacked to try to sell Viagra. At least I hope that wasn't intentional. David R. Darrow is the only other contributor to Dungeon Master I could find anything about, possibly because of the convenient middle initial narrowing the search by a lot. David created the cover art for the FTL games, including Dungeon Master. He's done numerous illustrations of that sort, as well as lots of paintings. He's still at it, and hosts a site called Dave the Painting Guy where he does paint casts, essentially talking while he paints. And on a completely different note, though my current Atari ST is not the same one my parents owned back in the day, I still have an ancient 3.5 floppy disk case we had back then. It's sporting the FTL logo on each side. Swish!